here's the other thing: can the industry keep up with the requirements? And so, I'll give you for instance, electrification of a lot of buildings. I think there's a very big underestimation of how much energy is present in natural gas flowing through a pipe and what that supplies for comfort and cooking and all that versus how much energy you can get through, the street versus, the feeders in the street.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Buildings 2.0. Today, I'm speaking with Paul Liesman, Director of Corporate and Commercial Commissioning at HDR. Paul, thanks for chatting with me today.
Thank you. It was great to be here. Super.
Let's dive in. Commissioning. What is it? And even before we get there, why buildings in the first place?
Well, everything sort of happens by serendipity, and this is kind of a good story. I was involved in a manufacturing business for the longest time, designing some sophisticated instruments for industrial and scientific use. And there was a company, great company, still around today, thankfully, called Cisco Hennessy Group, that needed somebody to come in and help sort of reorganize one of their facility management groups. And, I had a great bunch of guys there, but, their direction was a little bit I guess they didn't have a great direction where they were going, and they were a bit short on work. So, we looked around, we started to look at other avenues, and commissioning was one of the things that we were getting requests from clients to do. So turned out, we did a commissioning project and looked it up and did rather well, and then one project followed the next. What was kind of wonderful about it, though, is that we really were able to contribute to projects and make the construction better, make it work better, and have the client really experience a better facility once we had left. And nobody was really doing that before. It was a very this happened about the year 2000, so the commissioning industry was in its infancy, and not a whole lot of folks were doing it. So it was. I wouldn't call it blue water sailing at the time, but certainly was open water, and there were a lot of opportunities at that point.
For folks that may not know, demystify. So what is commissioning and when does it happen, right, in the building life cycle?
Well, that's really, the most common question, Jose, and I'm glad you asked that. So, first of all, the old myth that, oh, you come in and you commission something after construction starts, that's one great way to not have an effective commissioning program, because nothing is planned, nothing is priced to do the commissioning work. You're not part of the team. You're coming into a construction project as, a bunch of strangers. Nobody knows you. The engineers don't know you. The architects don't know you, or anybody like that. Particularly the people that you need to be proactive with and have a partnership with, and that's the construction team, from the superintendent down to all the trades. So really when it should begin is in the design phase. Now, I'd like to say that, before the 30% design docs are issued, it's a great time to get your commissioning agent involved. Even sometimes during schematic design, or when you're developing the owner's project requirements or basis of design, that's even better. Now, the reason why: the more your commissioning agent knows about the project, the design, the requirements and all of that, the more effective he's going to be throughout the entire program. You bring a team in during construction, they're really not going to know why the project wound up the way it did, and they're not going to be able to develop a really a good testing protocol. So really what it is, and that's really the basis of your question, what is commissioning? Basically a deliberate program to operate and verify that the building meets the owner's design intent, as well as it's been constructed to the owner's design intent. And there's a whole series of methodology that we have to do that, with documenting certain procedures, collecting that documentation, making sure that it meets the requirements, and then collecting data, actual data, to verify that it meets those requirements.
Right.
Does that help?
It does. And so maybe for my own sake, just to kind of summarize, you're working on behalf of the owner to take into account that essentially the plan was executed.
Yes, correct. Now, it's interesting that you asked that because, like anything, commissioning evolves, and there are many places for a commissioning agent to wind up. There's in a design build. Actually, we could be reporting to the head of the design build team or the lead contractor there. In that case, we are commissioning, for the contractor to meet the commissioning responsibilities. However, there is normally, I'd say, a line of communication to the owner or the owner's commissioning representative to provide the data that the facility is meeting the targets.
Right.
So, but yes, normally during the design bid build, there is a direct report. We are doing that on behalf of the owner. That is correct.
Right. If I had to zoom out and put myself in the shoes of a that's for now, let's call it a commercial building owner. Why does this matter to me?
First of all, I have a saying that nothing really works without commissioning, and I've seen it. Okay. And sometimes it's the most mundane things that just don't work, or the simplest things. And sometimes it could be things that are safety issues, or sometimes things that are energy issues. Okay. But if you don't commission, you could be having issues like, for example, duct leakage. Contractor may not pay that much attention to how all the ducts are constructed or air balance, for that matter, and it would create what I would call a permanent energy consumption penalty for the building. And many, and particularly for the commercial folks, they live and die by, they don't have a tremendous margin on some of their buildings. I don't know their financials, but I assume that they have a lot of money or there's expenses in the building, and they have trouble getting the rents that they need to make things work. So you build in an energy penalty, it doesn't help. Energy is a significant cost, both heating and cooling. You build in a penalty. You commission once. Well, there's a recommissioning also, but you commission once, and you'll save that energy for years. You can get a 15, 20-year payback on what you find in construction.
Give me an example of perhaps a recent project. I mean, you don't have to give specifics, but a recent project that
Yeah.
you on that is a kind of a good example as to either it going really, really well or in certain cases, the opposite.
I'd like to say that most of our projects are quite well managed because we do a lot of planning beforehand. But I'd say that, if things were to ever sort of move out of control, if you would, never, it has never happened. But, there are sometimes are things that can go wrong with regards to not having the right people in the right place at the right time. So then it's a matter of playing catch up and basically ensuring the client that, yeah, you've made the right changes, you've got the right people aboard, and you understand their project. And yeah, it could take some time, and there's a little bit of getting your credibility back. But that's about the worst that I've seen, where maybe the project schedule got ahead of the commissioning agent, which is not really where you ever want to be. We always work to try to stay ahead of the project and not have the project wait on commissioning. Most of the time, the way commissioning is, the way it falls out, that we have a terrific window in when we can do our tasks. So by keeping, one way that the project can get out of control is if you don't allocate enough time for the commissioning agent to be involved in meetings or site visits. Then you can sort of lose that control over the project and not really stay ahead of it. So it's important that when you propose a project, that you have enough time to be in touch with the project throughout its paces and phases.
That makes sense. Buildings can be complex, right? We could be talking about the architectural systems,
Yeah.
mechanical systems, equipment systems, et cetera. How when you enter into a project, whether in the design phase, construction phase, what framework do you use to kind of just understand, just to kind of take inventory as to what you're commissioning in the first place?
When you look at a building's intent, and that's kind of the first thing I look at is a project description, you know, and I've been involved in relatively simple buildings for important reasons, but it could be, for example, a instructional building. It could be for a military purpose, and they're training people in there. So it's a scholastic setting. Maybe there's some extra things that required for the military. But you kind of know what you're getting into. It's probably going to be an air-cooled chiller. Maybe you'll have chilled beams. Maybe you'll have VAV. Maybe you'll have backup generation. Maybe you'll have, a couple of interesting architectural features, or you'll have a couple of low voltage systems to, like lighting controls and things like that to commission. However, knowing the use of the building, you kind of know how complex it'll be. If you have a healthcare sort of a setting, you'll likely have a central plant, and you'll have, infection control and different ventilation requirements, and, that's particularly surgical suites. So you'll know that there'll also be a lot more equipment involved in maintaining the environment. So, the first thing you think about is what market sector are you in? Is it a data center? Is it healthcare? Is it a library? Is it an office building? And by the way, what's in that office building? What are the architectural features in that office building, which could create, a different level of complexity?
Talk to me a little bit about the tools and mechanics. So, what does one do when commissioning a building, like quite literally on the site? Have the tools changed from today than, say, even 5, 10 years?
Well, I would say that the tools haven't changed, but the rules have. So our firm, we oversee a commissioning process. Okay, so it could be, look, I could take a thermometer and, an IR thermometer, and shoot a temperature on something, or do a traverse and figure out flows and all of that. A lot of that work is, though, and this is why it's a deliberate planning process, a lot of that data capture is put onto the contractor, who has more of the specific tools to create those proper measure to do those proper measurements. Okay, a commissioning agent that one day is doing a library, maybe the next day is doing an office building with different technologies, is not going to have all the tools required. So it's really a matter of a business decision to put that on, into the commissioning specs of what's expected of the contractors to measure. So the other thing is that keep in mind that the commissioning agent does not own the equipment that he's commissioning. That's still owned by the contractor. So anything that we do, okay, has to be within the confines of how the system needs to operate. All right. We're not going to ask it to do anything unusual to stress it. Right. We're not going to ask the contractor to do something to destructively test his equipment. All right. And what we're doing is we also allow the contractor to review all of the test scripts prior to execution. So they certainly have the right to say, no, 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 we don't want to operate it that way. And they could give us a good reason or a bad reason. We can challenge that. But he definitely has the right to take a look at what we're going to ask him to test. And when you say tools, though, I mean, there are software tools to capture data, to capture reports, to create reports, to allow contractors to access materials, to put their materials into the project. So there are wonderful, like anything right now, there are wonderful software tools available now, numerous types that allow that create a better project cohesiveness.
You mentioned just now how the rules have changed. What impact has recent legislation, like in New York City, Local Law 97 and others, have had on perhaps your day to day?
Certainly, LEED has been a phenomenal driver of having owners have to commission their buildings. And, I think that, LEED is a great thing because it's a required process. However, at least my ethos is that don't commission because of LEED, commission because of the value that commissioning brings to the table. All the errors that we find, and none of these areas are, no contractor, no engineer starts any project that I've ever met with the intention of doing something that requires correction, but they do, and things happen. And there is a bit of a disconnect there, and between the design, the construction, and sometimes even the knowledge of the trades that go in there. So that process is designed to capture a lot of those issues. Okay. So I mean, yeah, local law 97's driven the requirement for energy audits. And then with the new equipment installed for local law 97 is required additional commissioning. So it's all helped our industry quite a bit. All right. And then, of course, lead evolves and more requirements for building envelope commissioning, which makes a lot of sense because a lot of heat is either gained or lost through the building envelope. And you could have the best HVAC system in the world. And if your building envelope is not either designed or installed correctly, doesn't matter. You're going to still have a lot of energy waste.
In your experience, are most errors committed on the design phase or on the construction phase?
I would say it's more of a construction issue, and part of it is, well, there's a little bit of blame to go around for everybody. Okay. The owners, the architects, the engineers, and the construction folks. And, it is a, financially stressed activity to build a building, right? Every building that you build is a prototype. I don't care if you're building, hamburger joints that are, one or the other saying there's something always different about another site or another building that it could be a copy exactly that requires some additional steps and something could go wrong. All right. You take that and every building has got a special site. There's no two buildings that are really truly alike. Maybe some housing, the builder understands how to build residential housing particular style, but I'm sure there's still errors that are created because you have different people building them, right? So everybody's financially stressed. Everybody wants to get their design in. The engineer may not allocate enough time for construction administration. Contractors may not be able to find folks with the best skill sets to do the installation, and things happen. I would not point finger at any one project stakeholder. And owners put a lot of pressure on everybody to get it done quickly and for the lowest price. So it's sort of a combination of where the economic pressures are that create some of the issues.
You alluded to this a little bit earlier, but are there specific common areas within a building that you find, whether on the envelope, in the mechanical systems? It's my understanding buildings are at the kind of center of some of our biggest challenges, specifically, the emissions from which the building footprints are emitting. To do things about it, well, we got to improve these buildings. What systems are perhaps the most, I guess the culprits of it? Is it the envelopes? Is it the heating systems? Where do you find the biggest challenges or biggest issues within existing buildings?
Well, I mean, I concentrate mostly on MEP, right? Mechanical, electrical, plumbing. All right. And, sometimes it's where the systems come together. It could be, you have a chiller plant, right? And then you distribute this chilled water out to the entire building. It goes through air handlers. The air handler sends chilled air out to various portions where the ductwork is set up. And a lot can go wrong in any of those individual, I'd say, paths to cool a building, right? I mean, you could have, for example, a variable air volume box that doesn't open properly, whether it's on the control side or whether the box itself isn't adjusted properly or there's not, the local controls are just incorrect. Or you could have a pump problem, where the chilled water doesn't get to the air handler sufficiently, to create. So a lot can go wrong. So it's not the individual components. It's when you add all of these systems up, right, that create to get them all working together, which is why we develop a functional performance testing for everything. And then to go a step further, we also have integrated systems tests. So for example, in the event that a power failure, but the cooling system starts to operate, that cooling system now has to switch over from a normal power to an emergency power source. And imagine what can go wrong in that, where the pumps will stop and they're going from, one power system to the next. And, you've got another power source, which causes mayhem. And does that power source pick up the load for the existing systems? So there could be any number of things that go wrong. I wouldn't. Sometimes it depends on the capability of the contractor.
Right.
So I wouldn't blame everybody. Sometimes, you get switchgear issues. Sometimes you get chillers that don't operate properly the first time. But for the most part, the components get going easily. It's when you integrate them with the rest of the systems that create the problems.
I want to ask you a question. So tell me where I'm wrong, and I'll use Local Law 97 as maybe a framing. So the city has put out an ambitious goal to be able to decarbonize buildings in a swift way. There's certain kind of milestones that we're looking to achieve, and I'm just using kind of round back of the napkin numbers. With New York City having approximately about 1 billion plus buildings in the city itself. Just basic back of the napkin math. I'll take out a calculator here. There's 1 million buildings. If we're looking to hit 2030 goals,
Right.
we're about 5 years away. That means every year that goes by, we have about 200,000 buildings. Now, granted, we could say, well, only a fraction of these buildings need to be commissioned. And so, let's take a fraction of this. But I guess the point that I'm getting to is that the scale at which we have to move and move quickly to achieve certain goals is seems pretty insurmountable. What needs to be true in order for us to, and not just report on buildings, but to actually improve buildings at scale and at a speed that these goals are suggesting?
Well, I don't know if you're going to like my answer, to be honest with you.
Tell me.
First of all, I don't know really how some of the goals are going to be met. All right. From what I understand, the 2030 requirements, they are achievable by most buildings. Okay. And really, my comment is more, it's more of a global comment than it is a technical comment. That, real estate in New York is very diversified, from buildings that could be 150 years old, right? To, develop, and other buildings are 50 years old. You have different uses, different architecture, different owners, and all of that. And, you have some people that it's great that energy is improved, and that it's, other people don't care about it, because it's a small portion of the money that they're privileged to have to spend. Should they be required to invest in some of these buildings that you could have a wonderful physical plant to operate as is for the next decade or so, right? So I think by forcing via legislation some of these things is hurtful to the city. I really have to have to just say it now. A law is a law, and you have to comply. So that's what it is. I think we're going to see that as some of these things as it gets more realistic, and as penalties apply, I believe we're going to see a request for forgiveness, or some issues of ways of building owners and operators to get out of making some of these changes, or making it less onerous on them.
Right.
I mean, would we? Here's the other thing: can the industry keep up with the requirements? And so, I'll give you for instance, electrification of a lot of buildings. I think there's a very big underestimation of how much energy is present in natural gas flowing through a pipe, and what that supplies for comfort and cooking and all that, versus how much energy you can get through, the street, versus, the feeders in the street. There's also the issue of creating winter loads that are greater than summer loads to try to heat buildings in the winter. Now they're working on it, and heat pumps are getting better. But as we have brownouts in the summer to run air conditioning. You're going to see the same thing in the wintertime, right? So, we have to be very, very careful about putting this in. Now, if heat pumps are more economical for operation and installation, I'm all for it. But we have a pretty darn good natural gas infrastructure. Of course, fuel oil it's still going to exist, but it's being phased out, which is good. Especially the dirtier kinds being phased out. But, the natural gas infrastructure is still pretty viable, as well as the steam infrastructure that Con Ed puts out. I understand. I don't know what efforts are being made to decarbonize the steam infrastructure for Con Ed. All right, but my whole thing with regards to Local 197 is that it's expensive, and it's going to stress the industry as well as the availability of equipment.
I think what you're alluding to is an important point and nuance where perhaps to put ourselves in the shoes of, say, your average New York City landlord. We're not talking about kind of the large institutional ones, but perhaps the
Yeah.
mom and pops with a class B, class C building. It seems like they're facing a perfect storm of higher interest rates, increased construction costs, lower demand for traditional office space. Uh, and all of that is coming together, and then adding on top of that kind of additional requirements, perhaps in their lowest moment.
Spot on, spot on. Yeah, that right. And now to add that additional significant expense to them, it could drive the stake through a lot of landlords' hearts.
Well, that's the kind of the math to me that's not mathing, right, if you will. And I haven't heard a kind of a good. I've yet to kind of hear a good squaring of that circle, if you will, right? It's
Yeah.
that the economy has changed, the demand for certain space types has changed. It's expensive to change the uses of buildings, and especially when there's no kind of money coming in. I guess we're none of us are prophets, but I'm just thinking out loud. Like, what does the 5 and 10 year outlook look like for many of these kind of Class B, Class C buildings where they're just trying to figure this thing out?
Well, there's a very well used term called adaptive reuse, and it's a very, very big effort nowadays. The biggest effort, from my understanding, is to convert commercial space into residential. And on the surface, you think about it, and that is, wow, what a great idea you have. We haven't fully returned to the office, so that leaves a lot of office buildings empty. But when you look at the requirement with regards to what makes a proper residential building versus what makes a good office space, the two couldn't be more different, both in the supply of services to each of the units, much more difficult and dense, if you would. You've got much more plumbing, much more electrification, much more build out into these things. You need a lot more perimeter per square foot. Now, I'm not an architect, so I don't profess to know the issues. Plus, there's also a code requirement of requiring daylight, and maybe they can work on that, and they can bring more commercial buildings into the residential fold. Okay, that's something that perhaps the developers can work with the city and loosen up some of the architectural requirements. And then you're looking at the construction requirements of putting a lot of holes in a building to make in the flooring and ceilings to make the buildings work with the risers and all of that that's required for residential. So that's one issue. But I think that if we open our imagination a little bit with regards to adaptive reuse, maybe there's manufacturing, that can come back into the city and some of the spaces. HDR happens to be in a space that they're building in New York. Our building's 110, don't quote me on the exact age, well over 100 years old. Our build out in New York, it's really great. It's beautiful. It's not overdone, but we have all the modern amenities. We've got staircase that goes between floors. You would never really know from the inside that it's a 110-year-old building. Now, if people aren't putting in offices there, maybe there are certain processes that can go in there, where you can run very, very light manufacturing. The floor structures are great. The ceiling heights are decent. At one point, the building was used for the garment industry. So, maybe some of that infrastructure can be reused or at least revised to add some additional uses for that. Of course, there's also conversion, a lot of the space to biocide, scientific use.
Yeah.
So you have to open your imagination for other uses for these buildings. And of course, you have to think of the embodied carbon in these buildings, if you had to replace them, what would be the embodied carbon of the replaced building? So it really pays to take a good look at why you need to bring the building down and to see if you can use it for something else.
It's a fascinating perspective, and I'm reminded of that saying. I guess when your only tool is a hammer, everything feels like a nail, if you will.
Yeah.
Or if we're
Yeah.
kind of thinking if it's not office, it's commercial. If it's not commercial, it's residential. But light manufacturing and other use cases seem to be a really exciting proposition, especially as we consider that the traditional office spaces, maybe we're used to it from the last 5, 10, really as long as we can remember. I mean, unless you're the big folks, right? The big firms, big companies, most folks aren't kind of rushing back to kind of the trading room style layouts, right? And so I think it's an exciting proposition what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. But interestingly enough, Class A space is leasing like crazy, and
Right.
unless they can really find a Class B or C building in a wonderful location, until it's upgraded, it's gonna, from what I see reading Biz Now every now and then, some of this stuff just languishes for a bit.
Do you find in your experience that the city itself is becoming more amenable, more flexible to just broader space types, use cases?
I don't know if I really could comment on that, with regards to the city. I don't, not that involved with regards to the leasing or their requirements or rules or regs. But look, I think the city, like everybody else, needs to ensure a steady stream of tax revenue, and I think eventually that will come around to do what's right to keep things coming in, to keep the industry healthy.
Well, Paul, this has been really fun. To end with this question, you've now had the benefit of 3 decades plus of experience, and I imagine seen things evolve and change. I'd like to end by asking, as technology evolves, as processes and rules evolve, in your experience, what do you think is likely not going to change about buildings, about the way that we design buildings, build buildings, 5, 10 years from now? What are we still going to be talking about?
Great question. I mean, the overall process of deciding what to build, how to design it, how to build it, bring all the people together. I mean, you still need you still need a team. You know, sometimes you see some of the coolest things on LinkedIn or whatever, where there's a machine that's actually laying the CMU out, or just by virtue of it's picking it up off the truck and putting it on the wall there. I mean, maybe things like that will change. Maybe they'll be able to, maybe they'll think about doing more off-site assembly and bringing in, larger, maybe plumbing assemblies or manifolds or things like that, and have that done off-site so that it's easier to work on. You get better quality. Maybe you'll see more sort of like the modular construction here and there, where you can control quality better and things like that. But still takes a team. You're still gonna need an architect, still gonna need an engineer, you're still gonna need a construction manager, you're still gonna need all the trades, as well as all the inspections and everything like that. I think some of the internal methods will change, and with technology and with software too, eases things and helps communication. I mean, we're able to have many more meetings, more effective meetings, project meetings using Zoom or using the Teams and all of that. That's helpful. But same people, we're still communicating. But hey, I can be in New Jersey and Connecticut in the same day, right? Just using electrons. So that's the sort of thing that I think is going to help us, and will continue to help us.
Paul, it's been incredible. I can't wait for part 2, and thanks again for
Please reach out. Pleasure. Great questions. I was a really very, very, very in-depth questions, and appreciate reaching out to me.
fantastic time.